Okay, so my name's Tammy and that is Yvette, and we thought we'd give you a little bit of background in case you hadn't actually been to Australia or Adelaide before. So these are just some lovely pictures of our city, and you can see there that the city is sort of quite condensed in a small area, but then it actually spreads out and becomes sort of quite, it's still metro, but it sort of becomes rural quite quickly. We have 1.7 million people in Adelaide, and the University of Adelaide is actually located centrally right in the city. So we have got just some pictures there of what our current facilities look like across the top there, and our students in one of the halls. And then this beautiful picture here over on the left is actually what our new School of Nursing and Medicine building is going to look like in 2017, which has just been commenced. So that's where we're heading. The School of Nursing is in the Faculty of Health Sciences. There's 5 faculties within the University of Adelaide, and we run 2 types of pre-registration programs. We've got the Bachelor of Nursing, so it's a 3-year undergraduate program, and that has been running now, I think it's year 7, so it's only still fairly new. And those students in first year do 3 days in the class, and then they do 2 days clinical throughout the whole program. But in second and third year it changes slightly, and they do 2 days in the class and 3 days clinical. So they have an ongoing clinical aspect every week. The newer program is the Master of Clinical Nursing, and this is a postgraduate pre-registration program. So this has been going, this is year 4 for this program, and so all of these students have a degree in something else, and then they've decided to change their careers and come into nursing. They, however, do a different setup to the pre-registration, to the Bachelor program. They do block classes, so they might do 8 weeks of classes, and then they might do a 4-week block of placement. So they're the 2 types of pre-registration programs that we currently run. And then with their clinical placements, so this is a map of South Australia, and you can see in the red circled area, that's the main metro area. It's quite condensed there, but then it sort of spreads out quite rapidly. The green dots are all the public hospitals, and then we've got lots of other health services, and you can see even facilities up into sort of where there wouldn't be many people around at all. But all of the students actually do a rural placement as well within their time in the program. So they can actually be, most of the time they would be located fairly centrally, but they can be located as far away as 800 kilometres, which I worked out is from almost basically Auckland to Picton, so it's a fair distance. So getting on to how we actually got involved in Mahara, and then a lot of the other stuff will feed into this after. I was basically approached from someone in the faculty about a e-assessment grant that was available, and it was suggested that we could do a project on Mahara. So we sort of didn't actually come up with it ourselves, it was suggested to us. And of course we successfully got that grant, I think because it was suggested to us. However, we ran with it, and so myself as course coordinator, because they thought it would be really good to run with a small group of students, and because the Masters is still fairly new, it's actually only got small groups of small numbers in the groups, and so then I needed to have a clinical lecturer to assist me, who is Yvette. So Yvette came on board, and then we had Tricia, who was our e-learning advisor, and Karina, our business analyst, and they helped us through the process and introduced us actually to Mahara. Trish had come from the University of South Australia, where she had used it previously, so she had some working knowledge of it, which was really good. So the motivation to actually pilot Mahara was, and a lot of these things have already come up through some of the other presentations, nursing is moving strongly towards using portfolios and ePortfolios as evidence of continuous lifelong learning. The other thing is that we're also, once we become registered, we have to have 20 CPD points as evidence of our ongoing learning throughout to maintain our nursing registration. And that can be quite an intense process, so it would be a good way of continuing on using Mahara after as well. So with that, every nurse has been told that they have to keep evidence of their annual education to keep their registration. And each year they're randomly selected, so you don't know when you're actually going to be asked to show that information. So if we were keeping it in Mahara, it would actually be really quite useful. The ePortfolio we thought could also provide a really good scaffold for the lifelong learning, can assist the learner to provide evidence of their current competence, which is sort of the main track that we tended to go down when we first used it. It's a continuous repository for evidence of their development, both professionally and personally, and we've seen a lot of that over the last 2 days. And it's pertinent throughout the learner's career because it can map their evolution as they're going through and becoming competent registered nurses. So prior to actually doing the Mahara trial, we're using Blackboard for what we put into Mahara and to complete the compulsory aspects. So when they go out on clinical placement, they have to then provide at the end of that placement a summative assessment, an attendance record, their objectives throughout the actual placement, and then there is some also employer competencies that they need to complete as well. So when we were looking for those documents, hopefully this works. So if I was trying to find a document for one student, yep, didn't work.
Just go in. You keep talking, I'll fix this up.
It doesn't matter too much. So if I was basically having to find one of those documents for a student, I would have to go into my Uni account, click on the course that it was associated with. So in this case, it would be Clinical Nursing Practice 1 if they were in first semester, first year. And then I would have to click into Gradebook, click into Summative Assessment, click on their name and highlight that one document. And that was to get one document of those 4, and they have 9 placements across the 2 years. So that's 36 times I've got to do that for that one student. So we figured that this was a really good way of trying to have everything in one spot so it was easily located. Doesn't matter.
No, it won't do it.
So we'll just ignore that. Where am I? Here. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. So as I just said, they're required to be accessed individually by their person, so locating and tracking of the documents was really difficult for both the students and also the lecturers. And it was, we found there was poor compliance. They would hand up hard copies, they'd submit poor quality photos that you then couldn't read, or you opened it up and it was this big and you could only see this much of the actual document. And they would also submit multiple pages, so you'd finally get to there and then there's 5 single pages instead of one continuous PDF that you were trying to look at. So we thought that the Mahara ePortfolio was a good way of going because it gave us ease of access to those documents. They were able to provide timely feedback to the students, the clinical lecturers, which was Yvette in this case, and we could assist the students to develop a professional portfolio at the same time. And also allowed effective communication while they were actually on placement with the group function. So we did it in the Master of Clinical Nursing program, and basically there was 20 students, but there was only 11 students left that had to complete some placement at the end of last year. So we basically had 4 weeks to prepare and 5 weeks to actually roll out the project. It was very quick, so it was a big learning transition for us and the students. And so those 11 students were obviously the only ones we could use it on at that time. So in November and December, we undertook that. And in the preparation time that we had, we met weekly, the 4 of the team. The IT established the platform for us. We tested the functionality of what we'd actually set up. Any issues were highlighted and sent to the IT team, and they rectified them fairly quickly. We developed 2 template pages, which we'll show you. And what we did was to hasten the process because of the time constraints. These guys were second years finishing their program. So all the previously uploaded documents I put into the parts of the template for them, so that they then didn't have to actually do that, because we wanted them to be able to have a sort of an idea of what we were looking for at the time. We developed a user guide and an articulate storyline guide to help them through the process, and we did an education session prior to them going out on their first placement. So Yvette did.
Hello and welcome to Mahara step-by-step guide.
So Yvette did that, so that was easy for them to actually follow through. And now I'll pass over to Yvette.
Hopefully that's working. Okay. Yeah, I'm changing that guide very quickly because we were reviewing it last night, and there's a lot of things that we've now learnt that's going to be changed, so it's a little bit better. We were using a version of, I think it was Mahara 0.9, because that's what we had available to us at the time, and I hear there's some fantastic stuff happening at the moment, and we're currently in the process, which is why we can't actually take you through our site, because our site is down because they're upgrading to the newest Mahara version. Okay, but this is a screenshot of our page that we had, and essentially we kept it fairly basic because at this point in time we were learning the process as well. It wasn't just the students learning. Sometimes they'd actually come up with some questions for us that we had to go back, contemplate, and then come up with an answer for them as a group. But what we did do to start with, if we look over to the side here, we put all the links and resources. So previously they didn't actually have, they had to go through a process going into the uni to actually access all their documents. So we actually put a catch poll for them to actually click on the documents, and as soon as you click on it, you've got your PDF up there. They could download it, they could print it off and give it to their venues so they could have their documents and get the assessments done that we required. We also had things up there, of course, where we actually set up a master's group, which is just up there underneath our names. We set up the masters group and then invited all the students to the groups and set up different forums so that we could actually improve our communication with them. As we said, we were learning at that point in time, and we did learn a lot of different ways of going about things. The other thing, as Tammy stated before, we set up 2 different pages. This is just a screenshot of one of them, which is our clinical placement assessment page. And the idea, or the documents that we were talking about before that they had to submit into My Uni, they could now, we set it up so that they could go in and they could submit it under each of their different placements. The advantages for that is that, say for example, the process that Tammy was talking about before, at the end of last year, I had 270 students who I needed to go in and do that check-off process with. And for every single one of those, with just getting the documents out so I could look at it so that I could then assess it, it took me around 5 to 10 minutes to actually go through the process, because a lot of the times they would be quite scattered, the document quality may not be quite as we want. And the other aspect is that we couldn't actually see a lot of the times when the students had uploaded. There would be no trigger message. So one of the best things that I personally, as a tutor at the time, found about this particular document is that as soon as the students come on, they would share the page with me, which meant that I would know their activity on that particular page, because I could go down the bottom, I could track it, and that means that as soon as they uploaded the document into placement 9, which is what we were on at that point in time, I would know there's a document. I wouldn't have to wait for them to remember to email me or to flick me a message, or I wouldn't have to go in there 6 times expecting the document to be there, only to be disappointed every time. And as soon as we would find that trigger message, it led to prompt and up-to-date feedback from myself, as far as I could go in there, click on the document, download it, have a look at what their venue was, feedback was in relation to the placement, add my own feedback to that, and then I could forward them back the document. The only issue that we're having at this point in time is that we would like some way to be able to put the feedback into the document, but I think we've found lots of things over the last 2 days about how we can actually eradicate that particular issue, where we might not actually have to write straight onto the document, but if we set these pages up slightly differently, as we've learnt over the last few days, we can put feedback straight onto the page in relation to that particular placement. So, it's a learning process for us. We've only been playing with it for the last 3 months. But the best thing about this from our course coordinator's perspective is that Tammy could go in at the end when she's getting ready to prepare to say who has or hasn't passed their clinical placement aspect, and at a one-stop glance you can see the documents being added to all of those areas, that the clinical lecturers have actually signed off against those documents, which means that yes, that student is really good for going as far as being cleared to be able to graduate and then go on to the nurses board, because we have to put nurses board recommendations in for each one of our students to state that yes, they are ready to register. Some of our students, as we said, we had a small group of 11, and this is just an example of one of the students who's actually gone in. So if we look at the previous document, it was fairly basic, but one of the quite a few of them actually took it with both hands and decided to expand on it. So rather than just having placement 1, they've actually written where they were with placement 1. You can see all the documents that are actually added in there. And that was with very little. They had 1 hour training session with us before they actually went out to placement. We gave them a whole range of tasks. And I met with them weekly just to get the feedback and see where they were actually struggling and where they were having problems. And without very much information at all, they've managed to come up with a reasonable document at the end, which they could submit then for their final assessment to say that yes, they've actually passed this particular placement. And as I say, right down the bottom there was a feedback section there which we could actually sign off for the whole of the document for them. Some of them were very, very motivated. There were a lot of excuses. We had a few issues along the way, but it was really quite good. When we was actually setting up the groups and the forums, we once again kept it very, very simple. Just set up the forums, invited the students out, they received the messages, and without too much prompting, they all decided to become my friend and to join the actual group, which was fantastic. Tammy and I had a little bit of a friend, see how many friends we could actually gather from the students. I won, but that's only because I had to sign off on their documents and they knew that. So essentially our challenges that we come up across generally was the familiarity with the tool, because we were new with the tool, we were newly trained in it. Sometimes it was a bit of a trial and error experience. We were getting questions from students, and when we were talking about the language, were we speaking the same language that the students were speaking, and did we know Mahara language enough to even go looking for in the user manuals for the actual resolution to our problems. Trish was fantastic because she had ongoing knowledge in relation to Mahara, but it's still different versions do different things, and she hadn't worked with it for probably about 3 years when we actually started off with the trial. So, but between the lot of us, we managed to figure out most of the problems. It was compounded as far as the familiarity because the students didn't have a lot of time to grasp it. A lot of our students were coming to the end of their course, and it was the end of the year. A lot of them were itching to go off on Christmas break. Quite a few of the students in the masters group are international, so they're very itching to jump on their planes and to head far, far away so they can go and see their families who they've been missing for a while before they come back and do job hunting next year. So at times we had a few student non-compliance, and some of them I still haven't heard from them in the future, but that's okay. 10 minutes left? Okay. I have a tendency to talk too much, so Tammy's got to keep me in line. Okay, students finished most of the tasks with minimal problems. We didn't seem to have much issues there. The weekly meetings did identify quite a few of the issues that I would never have known about if I hadn't have actually gone out and done the meetings. One of which was the fact that they had troubles uploading their documents, and that come down to, once we actually figured it out, an incompatibility between their browsers and their systems, and the fact that they couldn't upload using their particular system. When they went to uni, they could upload, but they couldn't figure it out. And that caused them frustration, and the fact that they couldn't do it to a certain extent caused us frustration, but we got in there, figured it out, put the information out to them, and they resolved that really quickly. Once we knew what they needed to do, they updated their servers and everything was fine. And they were overall happy. The students were overall happy with the use of Mahara's ease of use, and basically majority of the statements we got back were quite positive in regard to it for a future use. Communication, we had issues within the forums because I'm not a Facebook user. I don't Twitter, I don't Facebook, I don't do any of that social media type stuff. But my understanding was that when you set a forum up, that the students who were in the forum would get the messages that I sent out, and apparently that's not the case. And I don't know if that's the same in the newer version of Mahara, but in the version we were using, because I hadn't taught them all how to subscribe to the forums, it meant that they didn't get the messages, which meant that I thought I was talking to them and I thought they were just ignoring me because they didn't like me very much. And as it turned out, they were never getting the messages. So once we actually cleared that aspect up, then we got a lot more communication. The other thing we found with communication is there was no repository within Mahara at that point for sent messages, which meant that at times I was replying to students 2 times because my memory's not that fantastic, I'm a bit old. And so I would reply to them and then lose my track because I might go off on a Sunday to be with my family, come back, start replying, and I'd reply to them again. So apparently that's fixed in this new version, and that will be fantastic for us because having that tracking system, otherwise you do have a tendency with students going, you never told me that. And if I can't come up with an email that says that I did tell you that, there's a reasonable chance that they'll win that particular battle. Okay? Time constraints we talked about before, the student responses, basically it was hard for them to develop. They were finishing their final projects, they were doing their final assignments, and suddenly we gave them this new tool that we wanted them to embrace and to actually use. And in all honesty, they were very engaged for considering their time frame and the fact that they were wanting to head into the abyss, not necessarily stay around and help us out. But overall, the responses they had in relation to how good Mahara was extremely positive, and they said that it would be fantastic for our students to use in the future. Quite a few of them indicated that they would like to use it post the trial, and we've still got to find a spot that they can plug into, because once they finish being an Adelaide University student, we're still talking about whether they'll be able to use it or whether we'll find space within the server for them to continue using Mahara on our system. And within Australia, from what I can gather, I can't find a spot where they can actually just go and export and then import it back into a system. So that's something we've got to think about for the future. And there may be ways around that. They were generally speaking, they were fairly happy with the support that they received. They generally used the lecturers for support or each other. Unfortunately, my amazing articulate presentation, apparently they never watched it. It's very disappointing. But we've thought about ways that we could do that as far as a help page in their actual page, and we'll break the videos that we used to build the articulate project into snapshots within that help page, which I think will be better. We've seen it demonstrated in the last couple of days. It was an idea I had floating in the back of my head, and I think we're now convinced that that will be better than having this big 1 hour presentation. And listening to me for an hour could be a bit boring for them. I understand that. So overall the benefits were, it was a timely, it helps us out with assessment. I know that it's been bantied around a few times, or within some of the presentations I've heard that it's not an assessment tool, it's a portfolio. But our process, and the reason why we've got the trial, is as an assessment tool, and you know, it has to assist the university with their processes of trying to make online learning more easy to facilitate, and part of that is being able to use the assessment tools within there. And we don't doubt that there's amazing things that they could do with it as far as a portfolio is concerned, and we've got ambitions to go off and use the information we've learnt in the last few days to basically come up with some products that we can actually show them how they can actually use it. And I'm now looking at a course that I'm doing at the moment and how I can actually use Mahara in the same way that it's been demonstrated to me in the last few days, because it's just got such broad expanse within the system itself. When we're looking at our university graduate attributes, Mahara will enhance and they'll be able to hone down on those particular aspects when we actually do bring it into courses, if we're able to, and basically evolve the evaluation aspect of it. These are, I think, our graduate attributes align closely with what Mahara is all about, as far as deepening their actual knowledge, enhancing their critical thinking and their problem solving through the group work, through the teamwork, through the communication aspects, and basically getting them to be leaders, because that's what we continue to say to our nursing students, is that very, very soon, once you actually get out there, you're a registered nurse. You will be responsible for your own practice as well as the practice of some of the people who are actually around you. And it's all about 2 years' time, you'll be a team leader. In 4 years' time, you could be a CN. So it's all about developing their leadership, developing their critical thinking, and bringing what they're learning in the classroom and basically matching it and pairing it and putting it into use in their practical. And that's not easy to do at times, and we can see the value of this particular package for them to be able to build those critical thinking skills and have the reflectiveness and develop their emotional intelligence through this package, so that they can go forth and become fantastic nurses, hopefully. Okay, 3 minutes. The trial has basically been expanded. So we've got permission to go onto a stage 2 trial. We've got 450 students basically going into the next lot, which will be a huge jump from 11 students to 450. We're approved for a year, but we're hoping that it will kind of like expand to 3 years. We'll have 9 clinical lecturers to support Tammy and myself through that process. Our IT team doesn't seem to expand overly much, but will be fantastic. It will be great. And there's also been approval for use in other schools of the Faculty of Health Sciences, such as Psychology and the Vet Science, are thinking of putting out a mini trial for their particular students and seeing if it works as well in stage 1 as what it did for us. And the trial will give more insights into the potentials of utilising Mahara on a broader scale, which is talking about developing it into the classroom more. And our priorities will be to take back to Adelaide and to the Adelaide University what we've actually learnt from this experience, and to make the system work for the benefit of the students, because that's what it's all about, student focused education. To engage the staff to utilise the tool for their own professional purposes, so not just see it as a tool for the students, but see it as themselves. We're all lifelong learners, so how are we going to use this tool to enhance our own learning and to demonstrate what we've actually learnt? I think we've all been involved in projects before, and you guys probably instantaneously go home and put your project onto Mahara and then basically be able to demonstrate it. I've got a couple of projects that sit in a box, and I'm sure Tammy has got a few of them as well. And there's no way to actually demonstrate it, and when people say, oh, well, what was that all about? It's almost too difficult to explain the concept, whereas with Mahara, our staff can actually use it to showcase their work on the things that they've been working on in the past, and to get their concepts across better. Organising their projects, mapping out the higher degrees, such as the PhD research. The electronic sign-off, we're thinking about that. We're contemplating how that will actually work for the future. But it's basically, we want to model to our students what professional development is all about. We talk about portfolios in nursing constantly. However, a lot of the times there's no explanation about how you actually do it. So how do we model it? We will model it via this particular tool through our students, so that they can go out there with a better understanding about how do you prove that you're actually learning? How do you prove that you're engaging with you're engaging your theory into your practical work? Okay, as I said before, we'll develop help tools, individualise our theme, our language, which is what we saw on the first day, and explore the process of using templates, which Christine was talking about yesterday, so that we can actually move our collections a lot easier through, and we'll change that original template so that it comes up with something a bit broader, a little bit better, that will, yeah, so it's all about moving onward and upwards.
And so we've got, just to finish off, there's been a lot of common themes that have come out of the last couple of days that we thought were within our presentation as well. The CPD points, competencies assessment, the CV, one-stop shop, scaffolding and lifelong learning. But there's a number of other things that we will take back and look at further, such as the badges, the collections, the copyright aspect, matrix and rubrics, and also use of reflection better within the tool. So thank you everyone for helping us on our way.